So very welcome back to Unstable TV. If this is your first time on the channel, do not forget to
like, subscribe, comment, share, hit that bell. And if you're back with us again, thanks.
So, as it is coming up to Thanksgiving in America, and we're enjoying what our good friends in America are teaching us in the comments section on what's going on. What have we got today, Danielle?
So today we are going to be checking out the untold true story of Thanksgiving in America. So we don't really know what the untold story of Thanksgiving here is. I'm going to assume it's kind of more about the Native Americans, maybe. Maybe it's more so their side of the story, which is very important to hear as well. Not just from, the people that ruled America, but it's important to know about the people that lived on the island too.
So, without further ado, shout out to you guys. Let's jump straight into this for ourselves and you guys. Let's go!
Hello everybody and welcome back to Talk Tuesday.
Going up on the Tuesday.
Dang, it's been a minute since we've done a Talk Tuesday. So this coming Thursday is Thanksgiving in America. Now
this video is 3 years old. So yeah, that's all I kind of really had to say.
Trace Romano and Danielle is a big Kendall Ray fangirl. So Kendall Ray, if you see this, please reach out to us. We love you.
Now, Thanksgiving is a holiday to be thankful, clearly, to eat and spend time with family and friends, and it's a good old time. But what is the point of it, and how did it all get started? Most of us have heard the story of how Thanksgiving began, the way that it's told in schools, but turns out, just like most things you learn in school about history, is really fucking off. And since Thanksgiving is right around the corner, I thought I would ruin this holiday for you and your
yes,
family.
Let's ruin it.
Pass on to them and make them sad too.
Or
So even
Irish,
though
we
it's
don't
not
know
as cute
anyway.
and happy as the version we're told in school, it is very important to know what really happened. So here is the version according to the school. According to the story, the first Thanksgiving was in 1621. There obviously aren't records of everything, but here we go. So we were basically told that the Pilgrims show up in Massachusetts from England. They had previously kidnapped some Native Americans and were shipping them back overseas to England to live the rest of their lives as slaves, which the textbooks normally casually leave this part out. But once the English returned to Massachusetts, they met a man named Squanto, which you probably have heard about in the story. Squanto was part of the Patuxet tribe, which is part of the Wampanoag nation. And apparently he was one of the people that was on the boat, was going to be a slave, but somehow escaped and came back. Now, according to the story, we hear that Squanto was extremely nice to the Native Americans. He taught them how to fish, he taught them how to grow crops, how to survive. A treaty was created between the Native Americans and the Pilgrims, and this treaty made sure they were all mutually protected and sharing the land. So apparently one night the Pilgrims finished dinner early and they went to go shoot off some guns. And when they were out shooting their guns, Patuxet, who was the leader of the Wampanoag tribe, heard the sound of the gunshots and came to them. So once him and his homies got there, the Pilgrims basically invited them to join in and have a big old feast. The feast lasted a few days and they spent their time eating and playing and sharing and just being so thankful for one another. And they decided to make this a yearly holiday called Thanksgiving to celebrate the loving relationship between the Pilgrims and the Native Americans. Sounds like bullshit, huh? Because it is. So here is the truth about what happened. Alright, so
It sounds like a nice story, wrapped nice and neatly.
It's a little bow.
Yeah, but everybody knows that's not the way history works.
No.
There's always something more.
They're bleeding savages.
Like, they didn't just go from, absolutely hating each other to one of them shooting guns and then they just eat food.
Imagine how lovely the Pilgrims were. We're going to have a little treaty and you can share your land with us.
But, that's what America learns about Thanksgiving. We don't learn about Thanksgiving like that.
No, we don't. Our land. But it's Native American land, isn't it?
I mean, it should be.
It should be, because it's all... they were there first. We're going to help you, let's help these guys out, heal them and stuff. Now, this is what we're taught.
Yeah.
So, I'm just telling you from our history book perspective. We're off the boat, Columbo and pals jumped off, Native Americans looked after them all, and when they got themselves fed and they were nutritiously back to full health, they were like, Grant, we're taking your land and we're just going to destroy everything. And we're going to enslave you. But the Pilgrims were nice enough here to have a lovely treaty to go, you can share your land and we won't do anything to you.
Massive war, and then all of a sudden everything was fine. Which I don't think so. Because we do a lot of history videos here from like different countries around the world. And we've already learned so much differences between what one country and the next country that's right beside each other learns about their own history. It's wild. So yeah, Thanksgiving is obviously way different.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the parts that the Americans learned. So let's hop in and see what the real untold story is.
Back in 1608, there was a group of people that were called religious separatists. And these were basically people in England who wanted to break free from the Church of England and be able to practice whatever religion they wanted to. And these people would eventually become what we call pilgrims. So basically in 1608, they said fuck you to England and peaced out and went over to Holland. And they hoped that Holland would be a lot more free, that they could practice whatever religion they wanted to. But it turned out that Holland was a bit too progressive for them. So basically, England wasn't liberal enough for them, and Holland was too liberal, so they decided to find somewhere else to go. So then in 1620, the separatists decided to hop on a boat, which is called the Mayflower, and they took the boat from Holland to the New World, aka America. Now, it's important to understand that this was not the first group of people that came and colonized America. That happened before this. There were already British settlers there, and in 1607, they established a colony in Virginia. So the Pilgrims hop on the Mayflower and make their way to America. Now, this is not no fucking Carnival cruise. The boat pretty much sucked. It was dirty and smelly and not very comfortable, and they were on this thing for 2 months. And unfortunately, because, you know, GPS wasn't a thing back then, they went just a little bit off the route. Their plan was to land at the Hudson River, and they ended up at Cape Cod, Massachusetts. So, hey, give or take a couple miles, right? And after a month of them being in Cape Cod, they actually hopped on a little boat and went over to Plymouth. Now, the really shitty thing about this was their timing. They didn't have as much of an idea of, like, what the weather would be like over here, and they left Holland in September. So it took them 2 months, September, October, November. Not a great time to be in New England. You know, it's pretty fucking cold in November. And, you know, now they're into December and they're just now showing up at Plymouth. So it's snowy, it's freezing cold. They're not very well prepared, so they're kind of fucked. Many of the Pilgrims ended up getting sick and dying before spring even came, to where they could actually plant food and try to establish themselves. And in addition, they brought disease over, and it spread throughout the tribe and killed many of the Native Americans. They were reduced from 8,000 to 1,500 because of the diseases. Now, this is just a tiny amount of people that suffered at the hands of the settlers over hundreds of years that were, you know, the original owners of this land. Like, insane numbers, thousands and thousands and thousands of people were straight up murdered. Like, it's insane. Or they were forced to be slaves, some of them sex slaves, probably started the whole sex trafficking we still deal with today, and they were put back on boats. So we screwed them so bad. But in March of 1621, it was finally beginning to become spring. Sorry for the shadow, you guys. I didn't realize that it was going to get dark so fast.
Look at the little hoodie on the top.
In the spring, an Abenaki native introduced the Pilgrims to Massasoit, and then Massasoit introduced the Pilgrims to Squanto. Now, just like in the first story, Squanto did come and ask them if they needed help. He basically said, you know, you guys look like you're really fucking struggling here. You have no idea what you're doing. You just showed up here in winter and you're dying at crazy amounts. Let me help you. Let me teach you how to, you know, plant things. Let me teach you how to fish. Like, the Native American were such good people that even though their people were dying from disease and stuff because of the Pilgrims, they were still kind enough to them to want to help them and share the land that they had originally owned. Now, he also established a treaty between the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims, similar to the first story. And after the Pilgrims acquired some skills and figured out how to grow their own food, they decided to throw a big party to celebrate the fact that they made it through the awful winter and have started to be able to provide for themselves. Now, we aren't sure of the exact date of their celebration, but we know it was kind of around fall this time of year. The Pilgrims were like ready to turn down, ready to have this big feast. They invited Squanto, they invited Massasoit, and he shows up with like 90 of his homies, and they're all about to feast. It's about to go down. Their feast was lit, honestly, and this wasn't just, you know, sit down for dinner for a little while. This was like 3 fucking days of celebration. Like, they went hard. They were celebrating basically being alive. Like, the fact that they actually had kind of settled down and the friendship that they had made with the Native Americans. So when the schools say that the
good thing to
Pilgrims and the Native
celebrate.
Americans feasted together and celebrated after they taught them how to survive on the land, that part isn't false. That's actually true. But they always cut the story off there, and there's a lot more to this story. As time went on and more people came from England to America, the area started becoming more populated with pilgrims. Eventually, there were so many pilgrims coming over that they started to harm the Native Americans and demanding what was theirs on the land. So basically, the more and more people heard what was going on at the new land, how cool it was over here, and that they had it all set up, they started coming over, and they didn't understand what the original pilgrims knew about the Native Americans. And like, you know, they weren't peaceful with them. They came in guns blazing, wanted to separate everyone, wanted to divide up things. Angry people were coming in fighting, and as the Native Americans were kind of becoming outnumbered by so many pilgrims, they started to slowly take them out. Now, one of the biggest attacks that is known to have happened was the green corn ceremony attack.
So what happened then? They had their first Thanksgiving together, and then more people came over and just started, like, that was it.
Yeah, so the original Pilgrims, by the sounds of it, they had an agreement, but the rest of them didn't care about their agreement when they came over. They're like, this is a great place to grow food. There's a lot of prosper over here, so let's just take you over. And because they're like, we already do that where we're coming from, anyway, we have slaves and all this. We don't like this shearing stuff and all that.
Oh yeah, so they just brought their customs that they were trying to get away from to the Native Americans. It's mad to say that they don't tell you the other side of it in America. They don't go past like the first Thanksgiving and they just leave it at that. It's like, well, what about what happened after that when war came over and just completely wiped out the Native Americans?
Basically, what happened is one of the native tribes named the Patuxet were celebrating their annual green corn ceremony. And a green corn ceremony is an annual celebration that usually lasts for about 4 days and is practiced by various Native American tribes. And they did not agree to the original treaty that Squanto negotiated between them. And because of this and the fact they believed they had right to their land, the Pilgrims decided to murder as many of them as possible. In the early hours of the morning after the natives had their green corn celebration, English soldiers just showed up and surrounded all of the village while they were sleeping. They then ordered them to come outside, and if they refused to come outside, they would just set their shelter on fire and they were burned alive inside of them.
Oh.
The ones that did come outside
awful.
were either shot or beaten to death with a club. William Bradford, who was the former governor of Plymouth, described the massacre as, "Those that escaped the fire were slain with the sword, some hewed to pieces. It was a fearful sight to see them thus frying in the fire. Horrible was the stink and scent thereof, but the victory seemed like a sweet sacrifice." What the fuck? So after this,
No,
a
literally.
That's a
new
psychotic
celebration
thing to
was
say.
formed to celebrate the victory and slaying of all of those Native Americans, and it was called Thanksgiving. In 1937, they had their first official all-pilgrims Thanksgiving, which means there were only white pilgrims and no other Native Americans allowed. Notice how the textbooks and Google all say that the first Thanksgiving was on 1621. Interesting how they picked a date in history where things actually were good, but just a couple years after that, this huge massacre would take place. And it continued. The Pilgrims continued going to different tribes and attacking them, selling children as young as 14 off into the sex slavery, and just murdering anyone else. They would literally fill boats with like 500 people at a time and ship them back to England. There were even bounties paid for Indian scalps, so they were hoping that it would encourage more people to get involved in slaying them. One time they had a really successful day of murdering people, and they decided to celebrate by playing with soccer balls during this big celebration, and the soccer balls were made out of the Indian scalps. Fucking bizarre. And despite the treaty that was made, most of the chiefs were beheaded, and the chief of the Wampanoag tribe was specifically beheaded and stuck on a stick for 24 years on display for everyone to see. And so these celebrations and massacres have continued for many years to come. And George Washington became the first president in 1789, and he decided that there should only be one day set aside every year to celebrate all of these successful massacres. When he created the Thanksgiving Proclamation, The Native Americans
This
aren't
is
even
dark,
mentioned
you know.
in it one time, even though they were basically the reason that the Pilgrims were able to establish themselves, aka we may not be here today without them. Later on, when Abe Lincoln became president during the mid-1800s during the Civil War, he declared Thanksgiving should be a national holiday on the last Thursday of November, but he thought it should be a day that was all about family and being thankful, and it would bring the country together and help with the Civil War. Thanksgiving was first celebrated as a national holiday on November 26th of 1863. And then in 1939, President Franklin D. Roosevelt decided that he was going to move the holiday up a week so that people could start their Christmas shopping a whole week earlier. And the reason he did that was to basically boost the economy during the Great Depression. It added more time for people to shop for Christmas. And then in 1941, FDR signed a bill saying that Thanksgiving was to be officially on the fourth Thursday of November, not the last, even though it always ends up being on the last anyway. To this day, hundreds of Native Americans gather together at Coles Hill in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and for them it's actually referred to as a day of mourning. National Day of Mourning is on Thanksgiving, and it is used as a time to remember what happened to the Native Americans of this land. Obviously, this is a terribly sad story, but I feel like it's so important that we know the truth. And I plan to tell my kids the truth, not what I was told, because for a long time I just thought it was like a big old party, like everyone was fine. But knowing the truth about what happened truly makes you think of the meaning of Thanksgiving and what you should be thinking about on that day.
That's a very, very, very different story that we're told.
That's majorly different. It's not even a tiny bit. No, we heard a bit of the massacre, but Pilgrims were out here snaking them.
We just thought it was, they came together and that was it. Now, obviously, we knew there was more to it than that, but that's the story we're told. That was
dark. So, of course, a very big shout out to the original content creator. Do make sure you check out the radio, give her a like, subscribe, and share, and all that good YouTube stuff. Shout out to you guys for suggesting it, and shout out to you guys for being here with us. What did you think of this? Did you know this history beforehand? If you're American, is this what you're taught? Are you taught like the cleaner version of school? Was it taught as one big party, or did you do your own research after learning in school? Let us know in the comments. And if you're not an American and you're somewhere else in the globe, of course, let us know where you're coming from. But what version of Thanksgiving did you learn?
I like the way the Native Americans also have the day of mourning for them as well. That's a nice way for them to remember what actually did happen to their society of people, and not just completely, kind of covering over that part of the history. It's nice that they still have that to remember all of the past tribes and what actually happened to them.
So it was the Native Americans that basically built America and kept it going.
Yeah.
They literally built America up. So the first settlers, they showed them how to survive in the land and built it up.
But that's what she said there. If it wasn't for the Native Americans helping them and stopping them from getting any more sickness or illnesses and teaching them how to grow food and stuff there, the Pilgrims would have just been wiped out.
The Pilgrims were wiping the Native Americans out due to disease, and they still helped them survive the winter and looked after them. And they even tried to capture a man and send him back as a slave, and when he escaped the boat, he still tried. Fair play to him, because what he was doing was basically protecting his own people by showing them, basically making them seem useful to them. But the Pilgrims still, in the end, they overcrowded them and took their land from them. Because basically it is their land.
It's just such a sad part of history, it really is. Considering how, even from no matter what story we hear, it's always the Native Americans were really helpful.
Yeah.
That's everything that we hear, and it's so sad what happened. They're going out of their way to help a group of people settle in and make sure they're okay, and then they turn around and do that. It's not great.
It's a very dark period in history. If there's anything more in depth, you guys can tell us, or there's a video you can suggest us to check it out more. Now, this video, it tells you a lot. There's a lot of good information here. A lot of stuff we didn't know.
Yeah.
We had an idea beforehand, but we didn't know it went this. Soccer balls out of Native American scalps.
Oh, that's disgusting. I didn't know that was a thing.
And 24 days head on a stick for one of the main chiefs.
Oh, sorry, I thought she said 24 years.
Oh, 24 years, that's what it was it?
Well, either way, it's so disgusting.
Either way, happening in the first place after what they done for them. Oh.
No.
And that has been our 2 cents, and we'll chop ourselves out of this.